Welcome to today's workshop on how to fix your sleep and why it matters. And we'll talk about three different topics. One is why sleep matters. Most of you know about it, but I'll also then talk about what could be the underlying reasons why you can't be sleeping, and then most importantly, how you can fix it. Even Shakespeare spoke about the importance of sleep back a long time ago. So sleep is really important. We'll talk about why in a moment. First, a little bit about myself. My name is Mirthe. I'm a functional medicine practitioner. I see patients at the Life Center, in person and then online on Zoom worldwide. And I came to this whole topic of functional medicine through my own health journey. I had Crohn's disease, which is an autoimmune condition, and did an undergraduate in health science and learned how to do research and just found all these different wonderful scientific papers that helped me ultimately put my disease into remission 15 years ago, and knock on wood, it hasn't come back. So now I then did my postgrad in functional medicine and keep doing research on all the newest science out there on how to optimize health, how to help people that have issues that are quote unquote can't be helped, or that normal medicine struggles helping with. In functional medicine tries to look at the underlying triggers. It just looks at the biology, what is happening in the body that it isn't functioning optimally, because we're all supposed to be working well and function. We look at it a little bit like this, a cogwheel machinery of health. So our whole system, our whole body, if everything runs really smoothly, then everything works well. Our brain, our hormones, our digestion, and we slow down aging, we feel well, we function well. If something doesn't work well, if there's inflammation, if there are nutrient imbalances, if there are heavy metals or some chronic infections, then sludge starts to build up in that system. And then wherever we have our genetic weakness or a predisposition, that's where we then usually run into trouble. And within functional medicine, rather than looking at what the end picture is, we look at what are these underlying factors that are contributing to it, and how can we support them and fix them so that everything can run as smoothly as possible again. Okay, but let's dive right into sleep. Now, a lot of you might know sleep. We all have different stages of sleep depending on research you're looking at. There are 4 or 5 stages they usually talk about. The first stages are the non-rapid eye movement phases, and then the last one is the rapid eye movement, the dreaming stage. And we usually go through those for 4 or 5 cycles throughout the night. Each of them lasts between 90 and 120 minutes, and then we just keep repeating them over and over. So optimally, that gives us about 7 to 9 hours of sleep. Now, a lot of people nowadays actually only run on maybe 5 or 6 hours of sleep. And then some people even go less. And that has a lot of bad effects on health. But why is that? First, we'll talk about the wonderful things that happen while we are sleeping. Now, when we are in the deepest stage of sleep, also called N3 stage of sleep, then something happens that is really important. Our brain actually starts to shrink a little bit, and that allows a kind of a flushing of all the accumulated waste products from the whole day. It allows things like amyloid plaques that, if they accumulate, can contribute to Alzheimer's in the long run. It allows everything to just be flushed out. It's called lymphatic system. It's the same thing we have in the rest of the body. It's called lymphatic system. People usually know about that more, but we have a similar thing in the brain, and it mostly works during the deep stage of sleep because our brain becomes a little smaller and it can actually flush things out, which is wonderful and really important. It also brings fresh oxygen to that whole brain. That's also the stage where we produce growth hormone, which is important for bone density, for muscle mass, for looking young, feeling good, having energy. Okay, then we have the dream stage, the REM stage of sleep, where the most important factors are memory consolidation. So if we've learned something throughout the day, or we've done things, that's when that actually sets as a memory and we can then recall it later. And also our body produces testosterone during that stage of sleep. Testosterone, mostly known for men, but women actually also need it. And we'll talk about that a little bit more later. There are other benefits of sleep. It actually helps us control our blood sugar and our hunger and satiety levels. via something called GLP-1. The reason I put that fancy little term there is because it's become it's become popular through the drug Ozempic, the weight loss drug, which acts on that GLP-1. If we get adequate amounts of sleep, we naturally support that function, and it helps us control our blood sugar, control our hunger, and just have less cravings. It also, overall, sleep helps us repair, regenerate, lowers inflammation, helps our immune system, and make better choices and perform better the next day. Because I know that most of the people here are having trouble sleeping, so I don't want to go into too much detail on all the issues of when we can't sleep, but sometimes it's nice to know why certain things are happening. So oftentimes people, when they're having trouble sleeping, they feel that they find it much harder the next day to make choices that are good for them in the long run. So for example, we're much more likely to have cravings, and it's much harder for us to control our impulses. So for example, if there's some food put in front of us that we know is bad for us, then it's much harder for us to say, actually, no, I don't want this right now. This is not good for me. Or if there's a difficult situation with a different person, we might be more prone to react rather than respond in a good way. And that's because when we have lack of sleep, we're sleep deprived, we switch from that prefrontal cortex, our cognitive part of the brain, to our survival mode in the back of the brain, and we just want to survive. So then it's much harder for us to make all these wonderful choices. Also, we perform worse. It's much harder for us to be physically performing, to be mentally performing, to also word recall is much harder the next day. Even just one night of lack of sleep leads to inflammation. It leads to an increased risk of getting ill and catching a bug, and then also lowers our hormone production, like I said before. Long term, lots of bad effects. I won't talk about them now because I don't want to scare you, but I'm sure you're aware of this. So we'll just talk about how we can fix it. But before we talk about how can we fix it, let's talk about why can't you sleep? Why do we have trouble sleeping? And then the strategies become much easier and make more sense. Okay, so the main thought process that is usually used in the medical terminology as well is that if people are stressed, if they're oftentimes people that have perfectionistic tendencies, they're ruminating, they keep going over things in their mind, maybe they have PTSD, other stressful experiences, they might have trouble sleeping. And that is true. And then they get sent to cognitive behavioral therapy, which has a place. But oftentimes it goes a little deeper and people are still having trouble, and maybe they don't have PTSD or they're not perfectionistic. But even if they are, it's not fair to say, well, this is how you are, so now you deal with it. So we actually look at the underlying biology. Now, in order to be able to sleep and have a restful sleep, go to sleep, and then stay asleep, we need something called melatonin and GABA in the brain. And we also, at the same time, need some wakefulness promoting hormones and neurotransmitters to go down. And those are mostly cortisol, adrenaline, and histamine. Now, histamine is one that gets often missed. People often know about adrenaline. If they're in a fight or flight mode, then they go. Obviously, they can't sleep. But we'll talk a little, that's what we'll be talking about today, is how can we support melatonin and GABA production, and how can we reduce our stress hormones, cortisol and adrenaline, and histamine. Now you can see this chart here. 6 a.m. here, and then 6 p.m. roughly. The blue line here is cortisol. That's our stress hormone, and this is a healthy chart. So normally, first thing in the morning, we want a nice rise of cortisol that is healthy, that gets us out of bed, going, motivated, and get things done state of mind. And then we want that to slowly taper off throughout the day, so that we can then go into a nice deep sleep. At the same time, the other curve, the red line, is melatonin, and that has to do the opposite. You can see melatonin needs to drop, it flatlines throughout the day, and then it needs to rise so that we can have a nice restful sleep. Now, these charts are charts from people that are having trouble sleeping. You can see here, this one, for example, it's kind of low throughout the day. It has some weird patterns. So they're really stressed when waking up, but then they're kind of tired and then it starts to rise again. Here, this one is tired when they wake, then it is kind of okay, but then in the afternoon, they're starting to be really stressed out and are way too stressed and are having trouble winding down at night. Now, there are different reasons why all of this can happen. Obviously, the one thing is always part of the picture is stress, emotional stress, perfectionism, rumination, all of that. So if that's part of the picture, then obviously go and find some help to reframe certain things in your mind, in your strategies, but we will be looking at all the rest. Okay, so stress can also be something else. It doesn't have to be just emotional stress or a difficult environment at work or at home, but it can also be internally. Now, first of all, before we dive into stress biology a little bit, is just a little recap of basic biology. You might remember this, but we have two types of nervous systems to keep it very simple. One is the fight or flight mode, and the other one is the rest, digest, and heal mode. Now, in order to have a good night's sleep, we need to get rid of that cortisol and adrenaline and go into that rest, digest, and heal mode. Now, our body can actually think that it is under stress or a perceived tiger running behind us if there are other things than a boss that is maybe nasty to us, or a spouse or something like that. It can also be infections in the body. It can be mold in the home. It can be food intolerances, heavy metals, inflammation, or not having the right amounts of nutrients that can cause stress to the system, because our body can't really distinguish between real and perceived stress, and it doesn't know whether it's outside or whether it's running amok inside our body. So from a functional medicine perspective, we actually look at if you're already dealing with your kind of stress, emotional stress on a cognitive behavioral therapy basis, then we are looking at what's causing that stress inside that is making that cortisol curve not nicely shaped, but is messing with that. Okay, so one of the things that can mess with that cortisol curve is light. Now you can see here this graph again. First thing in the morning, here's sunlight, and we want that cortisol to spike. Now research shows here, this is out of a research paper, we need to have bright light first thing in the morning to hit our eye to stimulate something called the circadian rhythm and the circadian clock. Now we all have that inside our body. It's in different parts as well, in our heart, in our liver, pancreas, other parts of the body as well. But the main one, the master circadian clock that tells our whole body what kind of timing it has, goes through the eyes in the brain. And it needs light to stimulate. And that will then, if we have that bright light first thing in the morning, it will actually start the clock so that at night we produce enough melatonin. If we don't do that, then that melatonin won't really be produced. So that'll be one of the strategies we'll talk about later, is proper light exposure. Okay, but now we'll talk about all the underlying biological factors that can contribute to things not working well in the body, having too much cortisol, adrenaline, histamine, and not enough of the GABA and melatonin. So one of it is we need the right amounts of nutrients. We need the right amount of nutrients in order to make melatonin and GABA, and I'll talk you through that a little bit more. So this is just an example. You don't have to remember any of this, but we need the right amount of vitamins and minerals and other types of nutrients in order to make GABA so that it can then block cortisol. Now, often people think that none of this diet doesn't have that much to do with things. And of course we need to live healthy, but it's actually really crucial. We need the right building blocks for our body and our brain to make the right neurotransmitters. If we don't have them, then we can't make the right neurotransmitters. It's just not possible. So here are some of the factors that are associated with good sleep or bad sleep. Research is very conclusive on vitamin D's important on sleep issues and melatonin production. So they found that people with low vitamin D levels, even if it is in the normal range, but on the low end of the range, they are more likely to have sleep issues. And they found that a lot of people with sleep issues have very low vitamin D. And when they then gave them vitamin D as a supplement, it helped their sleep issues. Now, what they also found is that it is much more pronounced in people that don't have enough sunlight. So if you don't get sunlight first thing in the morning, then you really need to make sure that you're getting enough vitamin D to kind of counterbalance that whole circadian rhythm being messed up. Another thing that's important is vitamin C. Now, vitamin C, again, sounds like it doesn't have anything to do with those things, but research shows that people that have lower levels of vitamin C are more likely to have trouble making melatonin, dealing with their cortisol, and trouble sleeping. Same goes for B vitamins, such as vitamin B6 and B12 in particular, but also folate, which people usually know about as folic acid. They're really important for to have the right amounts of them in order for the whole sleep biochemistry to work. Now, I quite often see people that are in particular vegans or vegetarians, they can be quite low in B12, and that can have issues. People that have gut issues are often really high in B12 because our gut bacteria can produce it as well. And that can actually also cause an issue. So we don't just want to bombard our body with lots of B vitamins, we want to make sure we have the right amounts. Research also shows that we need to have the right amount of iron in order to sleep well, magnesium, omega-3s, and then one thing that is really important, protein. So our brain, like I said before, we need to have GABA and melatonin in order to sleep. And then we need to calm down our cortisol, our adrenaline, and the histamine in order to calm down. Now, our sleep hormones are actually made out of protein. In particular, and you don't need to remember all of these things, but they're different types. Tryptophan is the most important one here, but also glutamine. Now, they're just part of protein sources. You can have chicken and pumpkin seeds and all these different wonderful natural protein sources. They will provide the precursors for the brain to make serotonin, which will then be converted into melatonin at night if we have enough sunlight, vitamin D, vitamin C, all of these things that I mentioned before. So all of it is important, but we first need enough protein as a building block. And I see that a lot in my patients. They will have a tiny breakfast or lunch, or they will have lunch and breakfast, but they won't have enough of these building blocks. So then throughout the whole day, they're already depleting their brain and they're just not getting the right amounts. Another thing that can often lead to sleep issues are hormone imbalances, in particular progesterone. If you're, for the females in here that are still cycling, so if you still have your period, that can often be an issue, in particular in that second phase of the cycle, where we need to normally, if our cycle is healthy, we will have a really nice spike of progesterone, and that actually helps us make GABA. And GABA is one of the calming neurotransmitters that helps us sleep. Now, oftentimes women that have PMS or cysts, fibroids, heavy periods, there often is an underlying issue with their progesterone production in the second half, and that can also contribute to sleep. So we'll talk about how we can fix these things later. Another thing that's quite common, that's more for the women in their later stages of life, when they're going through perimenopause, or in particular and more so after menopause, is that, so serotonin is one of the chemicals in the brain that is then turned into melatonin to sleep. What happens during menopause and perimenopause, years before already, is that our estrogen at some point starts to drop, and estrogen is actually really important for serotonin to work. That's why often women, all of a sudden, they hit menopause and they're having issues with sleeping, because their estrogen drops, the serotonin doesn't work as well anymore, and then they have issues with melatonin. Another thing, so now we get to that other part of the puzzle, the histamine issue that is often overlooked, is when our body overproduces histamine, we often have a problem with sleeping, even so much so that sometimes antihistamines are being prescribed as a sleeping aid, but they have side effects long-term. So they can help once in a while, but they're really not a good long-term solution, same as sleeping tablets. Now, histamine, we produce it, it's in response to allergies, but also we produce it all the time in small amounts. It has some good functions as well. It keeps us alert and helps our immune system. So it has lots of good functions. A problem is when it becomes too much, and if our body can't dial it down at night. And one of one of the factors that can cause that can be an issue in our gut. Now, a lot of people have heard of the importance of the gut microbiome by now. It's all over the news. We all have bacteria inside our gut. You can see that on that image here. And they are important for us to break down foods, to create certain nutrients, to keep inflammation down. If there's an imbalance in that gut microbiome, in these bugs in there, then our body is sometimes shifts towards an inflamed state and starts to overproduce histamine. And that can be one of the contributing factors that I see often in my patients with insomnia. They don't even know about it, but if we test it, if we check their gut health, then that can often be part of the picture. Oftentimes people that have high histamine also have more allergies, more a runny nose, they have hives, they have rashes, so that can also be other high histamine symptoms. Now, this, again, is just a fancy kind of picture from a scientific paper. So this just shows that this is tryptophan, this is part of a protein, and the body has to use this tryptophan to then turn it into, you can see here, it turns it into serotonin. It needs vitamin B6 to do that and other things as well. It needs magnesium and other nutrients as well. And then it turns it into melatonin. Now, it can also be utilized into something else. And when the body is inflamed, then it will predominantly take away that precursor tryptophan and pull it over into this pathway. And then there's just, quote unquote, not enough left to bring it over into serotonin and melatonin. That can also contribute to symptoms like depression, because serotonin is important to be happy and feel kind of in a really relaxed and positive state. So that can also be another reason. This tryptophan precursor being pulled away by inflammation to make these other things to quench the inflammation. And that's where this whole, within functional medicine, we always look at the whole system rather than just one end symptom. We look at what's actually going on inside. It always has a bidirectional effect. So if we don't have enough sleep, as I talked about in the beginning, there are body-wide symptoms. But also if we have a problem in the gut, for example, or we have inflammation, then it can have an effect on our sleep. So it goes both ways. Not enough sleep will mess with our digestion and our inflammation levels and our immune system. But if that's not right, then that will mess with our sleep. Okay, a really common other factor are blood sugar swings. And that's often a hard pill to swallow. I see this a lot in my patients again, is that people that are constantly snacking, having little bits of sugary, carb-rich foods here and there, they might have trouble sleeping or contribute to trouble sleeping. So this should be the green line. This should be our blood sugar throughout the day. It should be a really nice, steady blood sugar. Having a little bit of meal that is really balanced, shouldn't really spike it much. But if we're like most of us will start with a porridge with some fruit in it and some honey, that's even the healthy version, quote unquote. It's healthier than other things, but it's still full of sugar. It will spike our blood sugar. And then that will just set us up for a blood sugar roller coaster throughout the day. And then the same thing happens at night. If we drop, oftentimes it happens a few hours into sleep, 1, 2, 3 a.m., our blood sugar will drop because it's been on that roller coaster all day. And then it will wake us up because our body and our brain thinks it's starving, just because we haven't had that nice steady blood sugar. So one of the things we'll be talking about with the strategies on how to support this is that we need how to stabilize that blood sugar. Other factors that can contribute to it, and again, there's all these, sometimes it seems a little bit overrated, or this thing can lead to it and this thing can lead to it. Oftentimes, or always, it is a combination of different factors. It's kind of like a puzzle, and not everything applies to everyone, but you will probably relate to some of these things, and then they will be what you can be working on. So some of you might be saying, no, I don't eat any sugar or carbs or porridge. That's not my issue. Others might say, no, my gut's entirely healthy, or this is what my problem is. So just pick and choose what's there for you. Let me just make sure that everyone's muted. Someone is unmuted there. Hi, Jenny, you are. Okay, so another factor that can play a role is that if people haven't moved enough, then that can lead to issues sleeping at night. Our body needs to be exerted, even just gently. If that's not the case, difficulty sleeping. That's what research shows. Another thing is temperature. So if when we move ourselves throughout the day, our temperature rises, and what they found is that we then have a drop in temperature as a rebound at night, and that is actually really important for our body as a signal to have a good restful sleep. Other reasons that people can't sleep can sometimes be restless legs, and there are some factors that can be influenced towards that. So oftentimes things that contribute to restless legs are lack of movement. It's as simple as that sometimes, but on a more in-depth level, oftentimes I see that it is levels low vitamin C, vitamin Bs, in particular, again, B6, B12, and folate, but also iron and magnesium. So I quite often see that in women, that they have restless legs at night, and then when I test them in their blood, they will have low B12 and low iron, or their levels won't be too low, but they will be just on a low end, and it already doesn't give the body all the right nutrients to calm down that restless leg syndrome. And that's also what research suggests those. Another common reason for not being able to sleep is sleep apnea, where it's quite common in obese people, but it can also happen in others when there's a stuffy nose or other factors, such as if there's any kind of inflammation in the body, so then it will swell up the mucus and we won't be able to breathe properly. Now, a functional medicine approach would be to say, why is there this inflammation? Why is the mucus so swollen? And often that can be things like food intolerances or chronic infections, again, in the gut, that are making the immune system constantly irritated. And if we get rid of those and fix them, then that swelling goes away, and then oftentimes that can help with sleep issues. Okay, we talked about this already, the female cycle and the progesterone and the estrogen. Okay, a couple other underlying factors, and those are the ones that are usually the obvious ones, but even though I still see it in people that they say, I can't sleep, and then I see them having a cup of coffee at 4 p.m. and then they say, oh, it doesn't affect me, but actually it messes with our sleep, even in people that have a fast metabolism for caffeine, because there are genetic mutations. Some people are better at metabolizing caffeine, some are less able to, but even a normal person that can metabolize coffee well, the half-life of that is roughly 4 to 6 hours, meaning that if you had, I put it down here, if you had a coffee at 2 p.m., which a lot of people do have and think that that is a safe thing to do, you will still have half of that caffeine in your body by 7 p.m., and you will still have a quarter of that in your body by midnight, roughly, plus minus. That means that that coffee at 2 p.m., which you thought might be fine, might be messing with your sleep. Now, some people are fine with it, but if you are having trouble sleeping, I would say go and have your coffee at 10 a.m. and don't have anything after, and see how your body is reacting to that. And I'll tell you some easy measurement and tracking tools you can use at home at the end of the session. Another thing that often gets overlooked is alcohol. And one of the reasons is also that alcohol in itself can be sedative. So people sometimes use it to self-medicate if they can't sleep. Because when we drink alcohol, it initially makes us go to sleep quicker. It decreases the sleep latency, so the onset of sleep goes down, we pass out. But then what it does, it messes with our quality of sleep. So then we get into that vicious cycle of drinking some alcohol, a couple drinks to sleep quicker, but then we feel terrible the next day, and that messes with that whole circadian rhythm, and then it just becomes that cycle. In particular, it will wake us up in the middle of the night because it has an effect on our REM sleep, that dreaming stage of sleep, and that is more pronounced in the second half of our sleep, and then we just don't have the nice restorative sleep, and we might be tossing and turning and being awake. Another factor is nicotine and also cannabis. Nicotine is fairly obvious. It obviously gives us energy. So if we have that up to 4 hours before sleep, it will mess with us even being able to go to sleep, but then also the quality of the sleep. It's much like coffee, but there is not much else. Coffee has some health benefits, so I'm not against people drinking some in the morning when we should have a spike of cortisol health in a healthy manner, but obviously nicotine, lots of other bad side effects as well. And then cannabis, that's again, it's a little bit like alcohol. It can make you fall asleep quicker. So often people have that in before they go to bed to help them go to sleep, but it will actually mess with their sleep quality, and then it turns into this vicious cycle of having a joint to be able to sleep, and then the sleep quality is bad, and then it messes with that whole nice curve, and then eventually our whole circadian clock in the brain is completely messed up. So if that is an issue for you, the sleeping, then that might not be advisable. Okay, so now we'll get to the actual sleep support strategies. And firstly, there'll be just the basic ones that are almost very obvious, and a lot of you might have already tried them because if you Google it, they're often first stated. So first things first, bright light in the morning. So like I started the whole lecture with that, sunlight needs to hit our eye in the morning to start that clock, and then it starts to click, and then at night it will produce enough melatonin so that we can go into a nice restful sleep. If that light doesn't happen in the first part of the day, then that whole clock is really struggling with getting the right cues to then make melatonin and sleep. Now, if that is just not an option, if it's really dark outside, if it's bad weather, if you're a shift worker, then there are some tools nowadays like this. These glasses here, they have bright light, very bright light, and you can wear them first thing in the morning, and it will really give you that extra boost right away. Ideally, put them on if you can't go outside in nature and have bright light around you, and that will help set everything up better for the rest of the day. And then on the contrary, at night, you want to do the opposite. You want to avoid stimulants past 2 p.m. I wrote here, but like I just explained, if you have trouble sleeping, you might want to experiment with limiting that cup of coffee or that cup of matcha or whatever it is that you're having, maybe to 10 a.m. and see if that makes a difference, because the body does have to break it down. And if you're already in a bad cycle, you might just want to limit all the stimulants to right in the morning when we should be stimulating the body. Also, we want to actually do the opposite to the bright light in the evening. Same thing as the light cue first thing in the morning. We actually need a dark cue to allow melatonin to be produced. When it gets dark around us, our brain registers that it is time to go to sleep soon, and it will start producing that melatonin. If that's not really an option for you and they're just bright lights, then some of these blue light blocking glasses have been shown to help. But I often just say just the more natural, the better. So dim your lights around you and just have less light around you at night and less screen time because it is quite bright. Also, relaxing before bed will help to reset that circadian rhythm. Remember, you want to have that spike of cortisol first thing in the morning, and then you want that to taper off. So anything that will kind of excite you and get you going and motivated late in the day is not a good thing if you're having trouble with sleeping, if you're struggling. So do anything that puts you in the right frame of mind to relax, whatever that is for you. There can be stretching, some yoga, some gentle yoga in that case if you're struggling, some meditation, journaling, whatever it is. Create a bedtime routine. Also, research shows that the more of a routine you have in the same time all the time, the easier it becomes to rewire that circadian rhythm in the brain. Now, a common thing is revenge bedtime procrastination. I see that a lot in my patients as well. They work so hard during the day, and then they feel like at night they just need to make up for that time and do something for themselves. What I always think and say is that you don't do yourself good if you stay up really late and then can't go to have a proper night's sleep and then miss out on sleep just so that you had some extra hours of Googling something or scrolling on the internet. So, but that's for people that know they should be sleeping and they just don't choose not to. Other things, simple strategies that can add up to be really powerful are things like sleepy teas with herbs in them, like hops and chamomile. Magnesium can help, and I have a supplement list in a moment. Really important also, again, sounds so simple, but it is very powerful, is to have a really good room set up for sleeping. So it should be dark, entirely dark. If you can't black it out, then have have an eye mask. It needs to be cool, because I talked about this before. The body cooling down is actually a cue for the body to go to sleep. It tells the brain to sleep, and it needs to be quiet. If that's not an option for you because you're living somewhere noisy, then they have done research on all these different pink noise and white noise and all these different other color noise machines, and they do help. So you could try those out. They help the brain just zone out from the other noise that is around it and keeps it awake and alert. And then also I talked about this, having a schedule, a routine, and also very importantly, and I see this a lot again, is people oftentimes eat late. They eat a lot late because they've had a busy day, and then they finally get home and then they cook this dinner, and it's a nice way to wind down and relax and have maybe some social time. But then that messes with sleep. So if you are having issues with sleeping, you might want to reconsider that for, let's say, 80% of the time, most days of the week. So research shows that if you have food 2 hours before bed, it will mess with your sleep. Some people that are really good sleepers, it might be fine, but it still actually messes with the quality, but they just don't notice it. Best is, if you have trouble sleeping, to try and eat no later than 4 hours before bedtime, so that the body can really already have digested it. Make it light, and don't have really fried and spicy dinners, because they can come up and give you reflux, and then that can mess with your sleep as well. So those are all very, in a way, straightforward and simple things, but they actually have a really important effect. So I talked about the light, and here, this is the eating at unconventional circadian times, erratic eating patterns. They can all mess with our circadian rhythm, the clocks inside our body. So if you have trouble sleeping, try and keep things really regular. Train your brain when it is time to be awake and when it is time to sleep. And we are not supposed to eat right before we sleep. That's not how we evolved. Okay, another strategy that might sound really simple, but it is really powerful, is helping with our stress. Obviously, I mentioned cognitive behavioral therapy in the beginning. That's something that we're not talking about today. Go and see a therapist if there are some emotional issues, obviously, that can really help. But if it just feels that you're constantly anxious in a fight or flight mode, one really simple tool to get that fight or flight mode to shift over into the rest, digest, and heal mode is actually by something called vagus nerve stimulation. Now, you might have heard of this, but the vagus nerve is a nerve that comes from the back of our brain, and it goes into most of our organs, including our belly and our heart and our breathing muscles. Now, if we breathe into the belly, which we obviously learn at yoga, but also in breath work and other strategies, if we just breathe into the belly rather than into the chest, it stimulates that vagus nerve. And that vagus nerve directly then shifts us over into that rest, digest, and heal mode. So if we do that throughout the day, in that second half of the day in particular, when the cortisol and adrenaline should be dropping so that we can sleep at night, that will help with that nice circadian rhythm and our stress management. So it's a really simple tool to try and do. Maybe set yourself a timer once an hour to just created a habit to shift into that mode more. Even if you have a lot of things to do throughout the day, if you have an hourly reminder just to switch back over into that rest, digest, and heal mode for a moment, then eventually you might actually be able to do your things and all your tasks that you want to do throughout the day, but in a more relaxed state without running away from that perceived tiger. Another strategy is exercise. I mentioned before that not moving can be a contributing factor to not being able to sleep well at night, and obviously the opposite is the case. If we exercise, that has been shown in research to help us sleep better at night. One of the reasons is that rise in body temperature that we get during exercise, in particular if we're sweating, but also if we're going for a sauna, for example, that will then help our body temperature to drop at night and sets as a cue to sleep better. Now, there are a few different things to be careful of. I've written them down here. Do not skimp on your sleep to get a workout. I see this a lot with people, particularly in London. They get up at 4 a.m. so that they can go to the gym and get their workout before they go to work. That in itself is obviously a very noble way of thinking, getting a workout in, but actually research shows that if you skimp on sleep, your workout won't actually be effective and won't have the health benefits that you want from it. But on the other side, if you've had issues sleeping, then working out will help you the next night sleep better and will mitigate some of the bad effects of not having slept enough. So if you can't sleep, get up and work out. It will help you sleep better the next night, but don't get up too early in order to work out. Hope that makes sense. Also, over exercising, another word of caution here, is if some people, they, in particular A-type personalities, they'll think the more the better. So they'll work out every day, tons of it. They go to the gym and then they go for a run and then they train for a marathon. That's actually not better, because exercising is a stress on the body, and if we overdo it, it can actually stress our body out, which can contribute to that whole cortisol curve being out of whack and then not being able to wind down at night. Okay, a big part is obviously in this lectures about what we're going to be eating to support all of that. Now, I talked about the blood sugar issues and how these spikes and drops can contribute to sleep issues. So obviously, one of the first strategies to mention from a diet perspective is that we want to keep that blood sugar steady. And one of the main ways we can do this is to have a really nice balanced diet like this. This is obviously a nice picture, but we want to have some really good quality protein. We want to have some vegetables. Then we want to have some good fats and a little bit of healthy carbs. That's what the diet should be looking like mostly. And then obviously we can have some treats here and there. We don't have to restrict all of the fun all the time, but it's more about what do we do 80% of the time? How can we best nourish our cells, but also our brain so that it can make the right neurotransmitters and doesn't have these blood sugar spikes and dips all the time. So to summarize, those are all the dietary strategies, and I mentioned them before, how important they are. So protein, really important for sleep health, because protein is needed to make serotonin to then make melatonin. So very important. Protein is also needed to make GABA, which is the other calming neurotransmitter. And protein will also help us keep that blood sugar more steady. So it has lots of wonderful benefits. Then I'd mentioned the fiber in the different colorful vegetables. That will keep our gut happy, and that will then help with the production of the right amounts of neurotransmitters in the brain. Okay. Word of caution again, I talked about lowering the sugar intake so that we don't have these constant blood sugar spikes, but we don't want to cut them out entirely. We do need some healthy carbs. I have seen people that have gone full keto for a long time, and keto has wonderful health benefits if done properly. But if someone does it in a non-supervised manner and they go keto continuously, not in an intermittent fashion, and they cut out carbs entirely, they can actually, just by doing that, they can lead to insomnia, because we do need some carbs to get all the right proteins into the brain to make our neurotransmitters to sleep. And there's other health benefits to having a bit of carbs, ideally healthy ones as well. Omega-3 rich foods, really important for sleep health. Lots of research supporting that. So that's, for example, salmon and sardines. Iron, in particular, women that are still cycling and having their period, I often see them being low in iron, and then that can mess with sleep. Because it's mostly found in animal products, but also to a much less extent in some plant-based products. So ideally you measure that one and see where you're at. Lots of different colorful vegetables, because they will help with all the vitamins and nutrients to help take the protein and convert it into melatonin and then help us sleep. But it will also help our gut. It will help lower inflammation, which all helps getting us to sleep better. If you really feel like you need a pick-me-up in the afternoon, then I would go for a cup of green tea instead, because that has been shown to be less of an issue for nighttime sleepiness. But in some people that are really sensitive, even a cup of green tea might make them wired and not be able to sleep. So just experiment a little with what works best for you. Talked about the B vitamins a lot. They're needed to make all of the neurotransmitters. And then magnesium is another important one, found mostly in nuts and seeds, but also some leafy greens. So just a whole food Mediterranean style diet will help with all of these nice, wonderful nutrients that are needed for our brain to make melatonin and calm down and sleep. No late dinners so that we can go to bed properly. Okay. Now, if you know that you have any other hormone related issues, let's say, like I mentioned before, oftentimes women that have a progesterone issue in the second part of the cycle, they will know it because they have PMS, or they have painful periods, or they have maybe even difficulties conceiving. They might be really anxious, they might be moody, they might have cysts and fibroids, endometriosis. They are all these conditions and symptoms have one of the factors that can contribute to it being progesterone being low. So if that's the case for you, then maybe go and see someone to help support your progesterone levels. Same for perimenopause, menopause. If you're going through that state, then you might want to check how you can support your estrogen levels, maybe through bioidentical hormones, to support that so that you can then make the right amount of melatonin. And then if you think that your gut might be at cause, then you want to go and try and fix your gut, obviously. But again, that's too much for today. So some of the basic supplements, I like people just try and get most of the things through their diet and lifestyle. So just the basics: light, sunlight, getting some sunshine on the skin so that you get vitamin D, being calmer at night, doing some breath work to calm down that stress response, eating the right nutrients, all of that. I find that more important, but sometimes it's just life gets in the way, and then supplements might just be what can help get us in the right way. And some actually are really hard. Some nutrients are really hard to get, even if we're having the perfect diet and the perfect lifestyle. For example, vitamin D, anyone here in the UK most likely is deficient. In particular in winter, but I test a lot of my patients, and even in summer, if you're sitting at the desk all day, or you're just wearing tons of sun cream and never go into the sun, then you're even in summer most likely vitamin D deficient. So that's a safe dosage for 5,000 IU per day, but I always suggest people to test at some point. And if you take that high amount of vitamin D, you want to make sure it has K2 in it. Magnesium is a safe one at night as well, can help calm you down. Doesn't work for everyone, but it's something that everyone can take without any side effects at this amount, 350 milligrams. Omega-3s, again, I test most of my patients and they're pretty much all low. So this is a high dose, but that's what research shows to help our system get a better night's sleep, lower inflammation, prevent aging, all of these things. 1,500 to 4,000 IU per day when you're not eating fish. And the vitamin C has been shown to really help with sleep and cortisol as well. Those are some additional add-ons, and they depend a little bit on where you're at. And I would highly recommend working with a practitioner to see what you actually need. Whether you need, let's say, more iron, because overdoing iron is not a good idea either. Whether you need more B12, overdoing B12 is not a good idea either. Same, maybe if you're having hormone issues, you might want to try and support it naturally first, but then if that's not working, maybe get a prescription for some bioidentical hormones for a while. And then I have the last few things, and then we'll go to Q&A. I know where the time is almost up. So if you, let's say you didn't have enough sleep, and because you just had something that you needed to do, you had a deadline or something else made you not sleep, or you just couldn't sleep because you had trouble sleeping, there are some things you can do the next day that will mitigate the bad effects directly that next day. So one of the strategies is, if you just have a deadline and that's why you're not sleeping, it's better for the body to go to bed and then get up early to finish the task than staying up late, because of that circadian rhythm, and it will just have a bad effect for the rest of the week and mess with our cycle. Napping has been shown to actually be really beneficial to catch up on sleep. So if you haven't been able to sleep that night and you're really tired, then go and have a nap. 30 minutes seems to be the sweet spot between getting the health benefits without getting you too groggy and messing with your ability to sleep again the next night. Because that's obvious, if you're napping too long, then maybe you will have issues falling asleep again that night, and that just makes that cycle worse. And then having a really high antioxidant rich diet. So all of these wonderful nutrients that I showed in pictures before, colorful vegetables, omega-3s in fish, they also have been shown to actually quench some of that inflammation that we get if we didn't get enough sleep. Tyrosine is a supplement, but also found in protein, that can help you be more alert if you just couldn't sleep that night before and you have something you really want to get done. Research shows that 150 milligram as a supplement in the morning will help with that alertness if you just need to get something done and you haven't been able to sleep. Exercise will mitigate some of the bad effects and also then help you sleep better in the long run. And then the one thing that I get asked a lot is, what about, so if someone actually doesn't have sleep issues, but they just don't sleep during the week because they're busy, and then they're saying, well, but I'm catching up on sleep over the weekend. That is actually, in a way, it works to a small extent, but not entirely, because what research shows is that we accumulate something called sleep debt. So let's say we should have between 7 and 9 hours of sleep every night to be healthy and recover all our functions. Now, if you have only 6 hours of sleep a night, that from, let's say, Monday to Friday, then that means that you have 5 hours of sleep debt. Maybe even you might be a person that would do better on 8 hours, so then you have 10 hours of sleep debt. That means that if you then have 2 or 3 extra hours of sleep on a Saturday, that doesn't make up for those 5 or 10 hours, and they actually accumulate. So you can't get rid of all of these hours. Also, if you were then to sleep a lot on the weekend, that could mess with your circadian clock, with that rhythm, and then you get kind of a jet lag, and then that messes with the sleep for the next week. So I don't really recommend thinking, okay, it doesn't matter what I do during the week, I'll sleep tons on the weekend. That might actually be a vicious cycle. I mentioned in the beginning or during the session that there are some tools that I find really wonderfully helpful for people to support their sleep. And one is a ring called Aura Ring. You can see it on there. I'm not wearing it right now, it's a different ring. And it's a tiny little ring, and it measures your sleep and your sleep quality. There are other tools as well, certain watches. I find them a little too bulky to sleep with. But what I found really wonderful with that is that it shows you, let's say you had a late night dinner, and then it shows you the next day that your sleep wasn't as good. And then you might want to make changes and just experiment with, what is a good time for me to sleep, and when is my sleep better? Or alcohol. Some people think, oh, I'll have that glass of wine because it makes me wind down, but then they'll see that their sleep just wasn't that good. So it's really powerful to make changes and see what works. However, if you are already struggling with sleep and you know sleep is important and you're trying all these things, then I advise against using those tools for the time being, because seeing that you haven't slept well might stress you out more, and then that contributes to the vicious cycle. Okay, so this is a cheat sheet that I'll send my email at the end. So all of you that want a recording of this and the slides, let me know, and I'll send also this cheat sheet through. If you want to know more about how to put your diet together, how to exercise, how to do all the things that I've mentioned in a little more detail, then I have an online course that is self-paced. You can just log in and watch all these different videos. It's a 4-week course, but obviously you can do it as fast or slow as you like because it's all pre-recorded. I sometimes also run it with the Life Center in a session where we actually do it live, and then there's Q&A as well, but we haven't got any planned until the new year. If you're interested, again, send me an email and I'll give you my email. And then obviously, if you're actually still struggling with all of this, there is the option. If you've tried all of the things that we talk about today and you still struggle and you say you want to take a deeper look at what is actually going on, are there infections? Is there a problem with my gut? Do I have food intolerances or hormone issues or nutrient imbalances that you want to make more bespoke and really look into what's going on for you? Then obviously you could work with a functional medicine practitioner, such as with me. Again, you can book that through the Life Center. And what I do with my patients is that we have an intake, and then we talk about the problems and concerns and symptoms, and then we decide on testing depending on the symptoms, and then also the budget, what needs to be tested, gut health, hormones, all of these things, and then come up with a very bespoke strategy. And before I open up to questions, here is a lot more free information. So I have quite an active social media where I post lots of mini videos with little advice on healthy living on lots of different topics, and also a podcast where I post a little bit longer content on different topics on how to optimize health, and that's obviously all free. And now I'll open up to questions. Let me just give me a moment here. Now I can see everyone. So how I'll do this, if there are questions, and I know the time is up, but like I said in the beginning, I'm quite happy to stay on for questions because I knew the presentation would be fairly long. So if you want to unmute yourself or raise your hand so I unmute you if you have a question, maybe that's the best way to go about it. And then you can just ask your question. Or you can, I've got some chat questions as well. Oh yeah, let's start with Barbara. Let me unmute you.
Am I unmuted now?
Yes, you're unmuted now. I can hear you.
Okay. I just wondered about a sad lamp instead of I have a sad lamp instead of the spectacles thing. How would that be?
That also helps. That also helps. So just make sure that you really sit in front of it and get a lot of it in the morning.
Okay. So how long do you reckon?
It depends a little bit on the person. They basically, research says the more light you get in the first until, let's say, 4 p.m., the better. Because we evolved being outside. That's kind of how it was. We would get out of the cave or whatever and get a lot of light all day. And even sitting inside even if we have big windows, the light is just not there. So the more light you can get, the better.
Right. Thank you. That's great.
Any other questions? Oh, yes, let me unmute you, Jenny, here. You're not unmuted yet. You have to unmute yourself. Yes.
I wonder where you'd get one of these lights from. Where would you where would you buy them? Online? But what are they actually called?
Oh, that is a very good question. What I'll do, I don't actually have the brand on there because I usually work with people just getting light.
Yes.
I can, if you either email me your email address, then I'll send you, and I can send that to everyone that if any of you that is interested in any more information, just send me an email so that I have your email address, because the Life Center, out of data, obviously they're not allowed to share it with me unless you're okay with it. And then I can send you some of these. I can send you a link.
Yeah, thank you. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Any other questions? Oh yeah, I've got Elena there. Wait, where are you? Got Elena. You have to unmute yourself.
Okay. When you wake up during the night, let's say always at 3 or 4, normally I wake up at 4. What do you suggest? I mean, if I can't I can't get to sleep again, would you stand up, read a book, do something, or it's better to stay in bed and wait?
So that's a good question. And I know it's a tough one, that when you can't sleep, then that is a common timing and occurrence. So research suggests, obviously, long-term, you want to fix everything so that doesn't happen. But if it happens for the time being, research suggests that the best would be that you get up and go out of the room and have a very dim light and read something, so that your brain doesn't associate or stops associating your bed with the habit of not sleeping. Because it's also a habit in the brain that we need to have the space where, once I'm in the bedroom, the brain needs to know this is the space for sleeping. So that's also when people can't sleep, it's actually not good to have a TV in the bedroom, because we then tend to watch TV, but we should really, if it's an issue, some people don't have sleep issues and they don't have to do these things as much. But really train your brain to say, okay, right now I'm awake. That means I must get out of bed at a dim light so that you're not waking up, and then do something. Read until you might be able to go back to sleep. Sometimes it helps to take a melatonin to knock you back to sleep, Might make you a little groggy in the morning if you take it at 4 a.m. because it takes longer to be metabolized, but it can just help to get out of that vicious cycle.
Okay.
And then
Thank you.
fixing all the rest, the blood sugar and the protein, those sound so simple, but they're actually really powerful. Those that should really help.
Thank you.
Hope that answered. Yeah.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Any other questions? No, can't see the others anyways.
Yeah, I just want to say that I try doing that, getting up. I always wake up at 4 a.m. and I get up and I go and sit outside in my little cold living room and read a book or something. Occasionally it works, but often it doesn't. Sometimes I get so tired that I'm starting to fall asleep while I'm sitting there. But when I get back into bed again, I still can't sleep.
Yeah, that's why it's not a strategy to make you go back to sleep. It's one of the tools that is kind of a plaster method of when there is an issue. Then then you don't want to also have the added problem of training your brain that bed is a place to sleep, to be awake.
Yeah.
But actually, in that case, it's probably looking at these other things. How do I get enough protein? Do I support is my system healthy? Do I have the right nutrients and enough vitamin D? All of these things are actually, they then all of a sudden, the biology works again. Hopefully.
Yeah. Does the brain sometimes get in a circuit that it just can't get off?
Yes, exactly. So that's why right in the start I said some people that are more the overachievers or perfectionists, they're more prone to that because their brain is already wired that way. People that have post-traumatic stress, they're more wired to be more alert or stressed out quicker as well. So that people like that are more prone to develop issues. But we can't really change that as much. That's just how personality. So what we can change is just try and optimize our brain biology so that we can do that the brain can at least make the melatonin and stop producing histamine and those kinds of things.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Hi, I was just wondering what's the how easy is it to test these, for example, levels of cortisol, levels of histamine, those kind of things? Is it something that we can kind of do at home? Is it something that we need to kind of go to a laboratory to get things tested through the blood? Things like that.
Sorry, yes, I was distracted because I was trying to find your face, the voice to the voice, but then so you were interested in cortisol and what else?
Well, all of those different things that you said can impact the sleep. So cortisol, histamine, things like that. Yeah, so cortisol is actually a very simple home test kit. You can do that in saliva. You can order it anywhere online. There's lots of home test kits nowadays. And then you can just see what's actually going on with your cortisol. It's a measure 4 times of the day so that you have a good idea of what's happening first thing in the morning, mid-morning, afternoon, evening. And then you see what's going on. When it comes to then actually looking at what are the factors that contribute to this being messed up, that's where I then usually recommend working with someone that can actually help you make sense of it. Because you can test, let's say, a gut test, but you might not be able to analyze it. Or you could get a panel of all the different nutrients, B12, vitamin D. Problem is oftentimes that if you get, let's say, vitamin D back, the range of most labs can be between 20 and 200. But what research shows optimally to support the immune system and sleep and prevent cancers and all these wonderful things is actually between 100 and 150. Or iron, really important for sleep. The range is often between 15 and 300, depending on the lab. But research shows that the optimal range where the brain gets enough oxygen and we can do all the right functions is between 70 and 80 of our iron storage called ferritin. Now, if you go to and get it tested, you might be at a 16, so you might be in the range, but you're actually way too low to be able to have all the right iron to make the right amount of red blood cells and oxygen to function optimally. And all these things then can that's because often doctors look at those things, right? They look at your iron levels and those things, but they say everything's fine, but there might just be, if the range is there, you might be there. And to be able to really properly sleep and fix that whole puzzle that's dysfunctional at the moment, you want to be in that optimal range. But you could just go and
to a walk-in lab and get all these things done, but then you might not know how to analyze it, obviously.
That makes sense. Thank you.
But yeah, this cortisol one is really easy, and that's where you just see the curve, and then you know whether your curve is what it is doing.
Okay. And it's sorry if so I personally can get to sleep, but then kind of maybe after an hour or two I kind of wake up and with a kind of a sense of stress in the body where it's not something going around in my mind. I'm not really thinking about anything. It kind of feels it's very much body based. Have you got any kind of idea what that could be? Because I literally have no idea.
It could be basically any of the factors that I mentioned in the lecture. That's kind of so I don't know if you, when I talked through all the different topics, if any of that rang a bell with you. It could be that there's some stressful event in your life, but you said that that's not really it. It could be that your body is having a blood sugar dip because you had too much sugar. It could be that that there's too much histamine. It sounds a little bit like that could be the case when the body is a little wired and it wakes up and in the body, and that could be from gut imbalances or food intolerances that are somewhere hidden, and that can make that happen. But it's hard to, basically all of the factors that we mentioned could be contributing to it, sadly. So if I was you, I would just go through the list and kind of, if you wanted to do it yourself, just try and go through all of them, because all of them, the wonderful thing is that if fixing all of these things will not just help with sleep, but long-term health, prevent decline in the long run, because they'll just make you healthier.
Makes sense. Thank you. Sorry, just one last thing. Melatonin, taking that as a supplement, because I hear a lot of things online where it's people say it's great, and other people say actually it's bad to take it for too long, but it's maybe okay to take it from time to time. Well, what's your feeling about that, and what kind of amounts should you take?
Yeah, that's a good question, and that is a little bit of a gray zone. Now, research has only found good things. There hasn't been any bad finding in research, but obviously it's just a kind of human nature to think, well, maybe it is bad to put something in the body that is external, that we should be making ourselves. So there is maybe, and it just hasn't been discovered yet, a downside to it. They haven't found a downside to it as yet in any kind of research, because it is the end product. It doesn't actually, when there is melatonin in the body, it doesn't stop the brain from producing it, but there could be some habituation. So becoming kind of knowing that I need my melatonin to be able to sleep, but no other bad side effects. So if you were to take it, and it has lots of benefits, helps with cancer and lots of other things, anything between 0.5 and 10 milligram has been researched. Some people, we only produce very little, so 0.5 milligram might be all that you need to help you go to bed or stay asleep. You said that you managed to fall asleep, but then you wake up, then you might benefit from something called a time release version, where it's just slowly released into the body. So you don't, if you take any type of melatonin that just gives you a hit, then oftentimes you will fall asleep, but then you might wake up later, and that is your issue anyway. So you might want to take that one that just gradually gets released. If you find that too mild, then go up to 5. Anything up to 10 milligram, like I said, research shows wonderful benefits for people with cancers and in autoimmune diseases, and no downsides. But sometimes people that have taken a higher dose feel a little groggy the next day. So it's more of a personal.
Okay, thank you.
Can I ask one last question? Are you practicing in London?
I am seeing patients at the Life Center, yes.
Yeah. Oh, okay, good. Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, well, in that case, it's time for everyone to wind down. It's almost 8 o'clock. Get into a nice bedtime routine. I will be sending you the recordings. So I think Life Center I will send the Life Center the recordings anyway, so they will send that out. But the ones that wanted the extra, the light, and if anyone wants where is it? Oh, it doesn't. the cheat sheet here it was. If any of you wanted that, then just email me your a message, and then I have your email and I can send that through to you as well.
Yeah.
Okay.
Can you put your email up again on the screen?
Wait.
Out there. I don't think you. Yeah. Okay, I've got that. I've got that one. Yes.
Perfect. So that's my email. So you can reach me under there. And I hope you found this helpful, and I hope you can sleep.
Yes.
It was lovely meeting you all.
Thank you.
Bye.
So
Thank
much.
you.